March 11, 2011, 2:46 p.m. The surface of the Earth shifts as the Pacific Plate slides under the North American Plate at a subduction zone 81 miles or approximately 130 kilometers east of Sendai, Japan. This region of the planet is part of the Ring of Fire, a hotbed for geologic activity such as earthquakes and volcanoes. This particular earthquake will lead to a tsunami, with waves as high as 130 feet or 40 meters, and one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The massive wave travels at speeds of up to 500 miles or 800 kilometers per hour toward Japan. Within 30 minutes, the initial wave slams into the coast. 1,242 miles or around 2,000 kilometers of the Japanese shoreline is obliterated in a matter of minutes. The magnitude of the earthquake is initially measured at 8.9 on the Richter scale, but will later be revised to 9.0. It's the fifth largest earthquake to occur since scientists started recording the magnitude of the natural phenomena over a century ago. March 11, 2011, 3:27 p.m. The tsunami wave has penetrated miles across the Japanese island. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is flooded by seawater. Entire towns and villages are wiped out as the onslaught of water begins rushing back into the ocean. The proximity of the earthquake's epicenter to the eastern coast of Japan means that there was very little time for residents to seek shelter or brace for the impact. The tsunami and the resulting flooding causes serious damage to the nuclear power plant owned by the Tokyo Electric Power Company. The 6 nuclear reactors at the facility have been generating energy since 1979. At the time the tsunami hit, 3 of the reactors were already shut down for routine inspection. However, the reactors that still remain operational are under immediate threat of melting down due to the devastation caused by the tsunami. The reactors are designed to shut down automatically in the event of an earthquake, while backup diesel generators continuously pump water into the system to keep the fuel rods cool. Unfortunately, these diesel generators are severely damaged by the power of the tsunami and the ensuing flood. The generators fail. Without fresh water being pumped into the reactors, they begin to heat up. It's only a matter of time before Fukushima goes critical, only adding more chaos to the mayhem caused by the tsunami. The engineers at the facility know that they need to get the generators back online fast, otherwise the power plant and the surrounding area could be doused with radiation. March 11th, 8:15 p.m. The Japanese government is reeling. Search and rescue efforts are launched all along the eastern coast of the islands. Thousands of people are dead, thousands more are missing. The extent of the damage caused by the tsunami is not yet clear, and the death toll is only going to rise. But as the government scrambles to save its citizens, they are faced with a new problem. Officials have recently been informed of the problems arising at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. They released a statement declaring a separate state of emergency in the Fukushima prefecture. This will be the first warning to the general public that the second deadly crisis is now arising. 45 minutes after the announcement, an evacuation order is issued for anyone living within 2 miles or approximately 3 kilometers of the power plant. As the people around Fukushima try to recover from the devastation of the tsunami, authorities are now telling them that all their pain and loss might be compounded by a nuclear meltdown. Many began packing their most prized possessions and make plans to leave the area. However, thousands of people don't have this option. They'll need to be placed in emergency shelters or decide to ride out the nuclear storm in their own houses. March 12, 2:06 a.m. Warning lights go off in the control room at the Fukushima power plant. Radiation levels in reactor number 1 are rising. It's clear that the lack of fresh water being pumped through the system is becoming a serious problem. Engineers have also identified a small radiation leak in one of the reactors caused by the tsunami. The power plant is severely understaffed due to everything that's going on. It's not clear what the extent of the damage is yet, or if the workers on hand will be able to contain any further leaks and prevent a meltdown. March 12, 6:46 a.m. The pressure in reactors 1 and 2 begins to rise. The fuel rods are becoming so hot that the water in the coolant tanks is beginning to boil. Steam fills the chamber as more and more water evaporates from the intense heat. The Tokyo Electric Power Company confirms that radioactive substances are leaking from the power plant. A reading conducted by Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency discovers that radiation near the facility's main gate is more than 8 times normal levels. They detect high amounts of cesium-137 and iodine-131 in the area. Officials at TEPCO order workers to begin pumping seawater into reactor number 1 to keep it from going critical. The salt in the water begins to corrode the piping and the pumps in the reactor. This could have disastrous consequences down the road. At the same time that salt water is being injected into Reactor 1, reactor number 2's water levels begin to drop. Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Agency, which is keeping a close eye on the situation, concludes that the radioactive cesium escaping from the nuclear power plant is likely being caused by the melting of fuel rods. March 12, 6:22 p.m. A buildup of hydrogen has begun growing in reactor number 3. As the temperatures rise, huge amounts of water are evaporating from the cooling tanks. Suddenly, the excess hydrogen in the chamber ignites, and the roof is blown off the top of the containment structure, injuring 2 plant workers and 2 subcontractors who were trying to get the reactors under control. The explosion itself does not damage the reactors, which is extremely good news for anyone still in the area or working at the plant. The containment structure, however, is not so lucky, as the blast causes a partial collapse. If the engineers and workers at Fukushima Daiichi don't work fast, a catastrophic failure is imminent. 2 hours after the explosion, residents within 12 miles or 20 kilometers of the power plant are ordered to evacuate. Around 200,000 residents flee for their lives. As authorities try to persuade everyone to seek refuge outside the evacuation zone, they also proclaim that no radioactive gases have escaped from the reactors yet. This seems to be true, as radiation levels around the power plant have begun to fall. Workers continue to flood the containment structure around the overheating reactors with salt water to keep the temperatures down. A large shipment of iodine tablets is transported to Fukushima and the surrounding area to be distributed to residents who lived the closest to the nuclear power plant. This is done to help prevent radiation poisoning in the early stages of the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. March 13, 3:20 a.m. A group of 90 people who have been evacuated from their homes near the power plant are put through a series of tests. The goal is to see if anyone has been exposed to high levels of radiation and to get a better idea of how bad the situation is. 3 people in the group test positive for radiation exposure. There's clearly a radiation leak at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yukio Endo warns TEPCO and the agencies involved in the containment process that there is a very real possibility that reactor number 3 may incur another explosion. March 14, 11 a.m. Workers run for their lives. Hydrogen levels in reactor number 3 are increasing. The pressure is growing, and it's only a matter of seconds before there is another blast. The hydrogen combusts. The cooling system at reactor number 2 suffers a massive amount of damage. 11 people, including employees, subcontractors, and 4 civilian defense workers, are injured during the explosion. They're carried out of the wreckage, decontaminated, and loaded into emergency vehicles that bring them to a nearby medical facility. One of the walls of the containment structure collapses. Now the structure is missing a side and its roof. However, officials still maintain that the reactors themselves are contained, which should help reduce the amount of radiation escaping from the power plant. To increase the effectiveness of the cooling process, emergency crews mix boron with ocean water. Boron is highly effective at absorbing neutrons, which as a result slows the nuclear chain reactions happening in the core. Even though authorities still claim that the radiation is contained at Fukushima, they recommend anyone who did not leave during the first evacuation should remain indoors until further notice. As a result of the explosion and the cooling pumps being left unattended, approximately 8.9 feet or 2.7 meters of the control rods in reactor number 2 are above water. Radioactive steam begins to build up in the structure. March 15th, 6 a.m. There is a detonation in reactor number 2. The intense heat from the exposed fuel rods caused the hydrogen in the containment structure to detonate. This damages the suppression pool, which leads to more control rods being exposed. As a result of the third explosion in 4 days at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, the U.S. Navy decides to reposition its ships and planes in the area. They've already begun to detect low levels of airborne radioactivity, and it seems like the situation is only going to get worse. 3 sailors aboard the USS Ronald Reagan test positive for low levels of radiation in their systems. Later that morning, Secretary Yukio Edano announces that a nuclear meltdown could happen in the 3 damaged reactors at the power plant. It is confirmed that the amount of radiation around the facility has reached levels that can impact human health. Authorities recommend that anyone who lives within 18.6 miles or 30 kilometers of the power plant should remain indoors at all times to minimize the risk of exposure. A general evacuation order is given at the power plant for all workers. Around 800 people leave the area and seek shelter away from the facility in case the worst-case scenario occurs. 50 skilled workers remain behind to conduct emergency operations in an attempt to keep the reactors from melting down. They will likely receive high doses of radiation by staying. but they bravely accept this responsibility in the hopes of mitigating a disaster that could end up being on the same scale as Chernobyl. March 15, 8:54 a.m. A fire breaks out in reactor number 4. This particular reactor had already been shut down before the earthquake occurred. However, it's believed that the fuel storage pool in the structure has caught fire and is releasing radioactive steam into the atmosphere. Prime Minister Naoto Kan explains the situation to the Japanese people and urges them to remain calm. He notes that there's a very high risk of radioactive materials leaking out of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant at this time. The government enacts a no-fly zone within 30 kilometers of the nuclear plant. 2 hours later, the fire in reactor number 4 is put out. The International Atomic Energy Agency has been collecting data around the power plant and reveals that radiation levels are 167 times the average annual dose that is acceptable for someone to receive. Further investigation determines that the exposure rate near the facility is up to 400 millisieverts per hour when a person's exposure should only be around 2.4 millisieverts per year. It's concluded that the situation at Fukushima is becoming dire. The explosion in reactor number 2 may have compromised the integrity of the main containment vessel. Something must be done to suppress the high levels of radiation escaping the reactor. That night, TEPCO plans to use helicopters to drop water into the compromised containment structure to aid in the cooling process. March 16th, 7 a.m. Another fire breaks out in the building that houses reactor number 4. It's determined that around 70% of the fuel rods in Unit 1 and 33% of the fuel rods in Unit 2 have been damaged. It's also suspected that the core of Reactor 3 is compromised. Cool seawater is continuously injected into the reactors to try to keep them stable. March 17, 4:35 a.m. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission releases a statement highly recommending any U.S. citizens that are located within 50 miles or 80 kilometers of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant evacuate the area due to the risk of radiation exposure. The head of the NRC informs Congress that the spent fuel rod pool no longer has water in it, meaning that huge amounts of radiation are being released from the facility every second. Japanese Defense Minister Toshimi Kitazawa initiates a plan to combat the crisis from both the air and the ground. The top priority is to cool reactor number 3 as soon as possible. Anyone who is involved in the mission will be put at great risk. However, time is running out and something must be done. March 17th, 9:48 a.m. Helicopters arrive above the damaged power plant. They dump gallons and gallons of seawater from the Pacific Ocean onto reactors number 3 and 4 to cool the structures. After hours of carrying out the operation, there seems to be no measurable impact on lowering radiation levels. The measurements in the area still put the radiation around 170 millisieverts per hour. The aerial bombardment of water is ceased to reduce the risk of exposure to the pilots and other emergency personnel. At this point, it's announced that at least 2 people are missing at the power plant, and another has shown signs of radiation poisoning from prolonged exposure. As more information comes out, the number of radiation-related illnesses increases to approximately 20 people. Around 7:30 p.m., the Japanese Defense Ministry brings in 5 water cannon trucks to continue to douse the reactors with cool water to keep them from overheating. However, like the helicopter operation, the water cannons have a minimal effect and are withdrawn only 40 minutes later. For days, the Tokyo Electric Power Company has been denying claims that any of the spent fuel pools are dry, even though many believe this is the reason radiation levels are so elevated. Instead, TEPCO claims there is still water in every tank, but the amount in each is unknown. Australia urges its citizens residing within 50 miles or 80 kilometers of the Fukushima Daiichi plant to evacuate. March 18th. Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency raises the crisis threat level from level 4 to level 5. This puts it at the same severity as the 3 Mile Island accident in 1979. The International Nuclear Events Scale determines that a level 5 incident will result in the release of large quantities of radioactive material, resulting in several deaths. March 19th, 9 a.m. While the world focuses on the events unfolding at the Fukushima plant, the nation of Japan is still reeling from the devastation of the tsunami. Search and rescue operations are carried out across the country, as thousands of people are still missing. Their homes have been swept away by the tsunami, and entire towns have been leveled. The most tragic part is that the bodies of many loved ones will never be found, as they've been carried out to sea as the waters from the gigantic wave receded back to the ocean. By this point, 7,348 people have been confirmed dead. At least 10,947 people are missing. and 2,611 people are being treated for severe injuries, all caused by the tsunami that hit the Japanese coast 8 days prior. That afternoon, engineers and workers pushed themselves to the brink of exhaustion to restore power to the cooling systems at the nuclear power plant. They hoped that within the next 2 days the power will be back online. Now diesel generators are brought in and hooked up to the water pumps of Units 5 and 6. Progress is slow, but as power comes back online, the reactors begin to cool. Unfortunately, milk and water tested around Fukushima are found to contain high levels of radioactive iodine. Tap water in Tokyo, which is located 140 miles or 225 kilometers away, has also tested positive for elevated levels of radiation. March 20th, 9 a.m. Temperatures in reactors 5 and 6 reach safe levels. Engineers are now able to enact a cold shutdown as temperatures are below 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Electrical cables are connected to the cooling systems of the remaining reactors in preparation for restoring power. Everything seems to be going according to plan. The workers are all on track to get all 6 reactors under control as long as nothing else goes wrong in the next several hours. However, at around 1 p.m., the pressure inside reactor number 3 begins to increase again. Workers panic as they were so close to getting the power plant under control. They scramble to reduce the pressure by any means necessary and avoid another explosion. An hour later, Japan's National Police Agency releases the latest numbers for the tsunami victims. 8,199 people are confirmed dead. 12,722 are now reported missing. March 21st. Black smoke begins to rise from the containment structure of reactor number 3. There is clearly something very wrong. Fearing the worst, workers are evacuated in case the reactor goes critical, and there's an explosion. Power has now been restored to reactors 1, 2, 5, and 6. Reactors 3 and 4 are the only ones that pose a serious threat at this point in time. But if the workers can't return to the power plant soon, systems could begin to fail, and they will be right back to square one. Emergency teams are on standby waiting for the all-clear to resume their work. March 22nd. Workers are allowed to return to the power plant and resume their tasks. Seawater is still being pumped into Units 2, 3, and 4. The salt is continuously corroding the system, but if the water isn't injected into the reactors, there will be a meltdown. Readings are taken south of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, and it's found that the water there contains 126.7 times the legal limits of radioactive iodine. It's also discovered that cesium-134 exceeds the maximum limit by 24.8 times, and cesium-137, which has a half-life of approximately 30 years, is at levels of 16.5 times higher than acceptable. The following day, radiation is found in 11 types of vegetables from the area around Fukushima, and any shipments out of the region are halted. However, workers at the power plant have made progress. All reactors now have electrical power running to them, meaning that any undamaged systems can be brought back online. Tokyo's tap water is found to contain 210 becquerels per liter of iodine-131. This is over twice the recommended limit for infants and young children. March 24th. Even with power restored, the water levels in Unit 4's spent fuel pool are incredibly low. To remedy this situation, 135 metric tons of seawater are flushed into the system. As this is being done, the temperature in Reactor 1 increases to 752 degrees Fahrenheit or 400 degrees Celsius. The system was designed to only be able to handle temperatures below 576 degrees Fahrenheit or 302 degrees Celsius. A plume of smoke rises out of reactors 1, 2, 3, and 4. In order to install much-needed electrical cables to Unit 3's reactor pumps, 2 men wade through a pool of irradiated water. Although there are inevitable risks involved, their suits are designed to handle intense heat and radiation. Tragically, the irradiated water seeps into their protective gear and delivers 180 millisieverts of radiation directly to their bodies. These men are heroes who put preventing a nuclear meltdown ahead of their own lives and completed their mission. The cables are successfully connected and the pumps are powered up. Unfortunately, now they are paying the price. Both men are sent to the hospital to be treated for radiation poisoning. March 25th. The pumps at Reactor 1 are initiated. Fresh water instead of salt water begins flooding into the cooling pool. This will reduce the amount of corrosion done to the system, but the seawater has already taken its toll. The temperature in the core begins to fall and eventually settles around 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 204.5 degrees Celsius. This is within normal operational parameters. Evacuation efforts continue in the areas around the power plant. Some families still refuse to leave. An airplane lifts off from a runway in Tokyo and lands in China. Passengers disembark. However, 2 Japanese citizens are found to have high levels of radiation in their bodies. They're sent to a nearby hospital to begin decontamination treatments. March 26th. The water pump in Reactor 2 is activated. Fresh water begins to flow into the system. Tests are once again run on the ocean water to the south of the power plant. It's found to contain 1,250 times the legal limit of radioactive iodine-131. The previous day, the seawater contained 103.9 times the limit, meaning radioactive waste is leaking out of the power plant and into the sea. 2 days later, a damaged turbine is found to be spewing contaminated water out of the facility. This has raised radiation levels to around 1,000 millisieverts per hour, which is enough to give someone a fatal dose of radiation within 4 to 5 hours. Workers are warned to stay away from the leak until it can be fixed. On March 31st, Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency tests the seawater near the power plant and finds it contains 4,385 times more radiation than the maximum safety levels. The amount of radiation being spread into the ocean and surrounding areas is increasing exponentially. April 1st. The Tokyo Electric Power Company brings an anti-scattering agent that is sprayed into the plant's common spent fuel pool area. This is done to reduce the amount of radioactive particles carried across the landscape by the wind and rain. April 2nd. The main leak is found. A 20-centimeter crack near a water intake pipe in Unit 2 is leaking irradiated water at 1,000 millisieverts per hour into the surrounding environment. The crack must be filled in order to stop the contamination. However, initial attempts to get the leak under control fail. Every minute that the leak is allowed to continue, more and more radiation makes its way into the environment. Samples of seawater now contain 7.5 million times the legal limit of radioactive particles. The water and the landscape around Fukushima Daiichi Power Plant are irradiated to the point that it's no longer safe for residents to return. Japan's chief cabinet secretary informs the population that the people who have been evacuated from the area will not be able to come back to their homes for the foreseeable future. 2 days later, on April 4th, TEPCO dumps 11,500 tons of water with low levels of contamination into the ocean. The company says this must be done to free up storage room for highly contaminated water at the facility. This only worsens one of the biggest human-caused environmental disasters in recorded history. April 6th. The 20-centimeter crack in Unit 2 is finally fixed. It's been leaking for days, releasing untold amounts of radioactive liquid into the environment. 6,000 cubic meters of nitrogen gas are pumped into Reactor 1 to counteract a hydrogen buildup and reduce flammability in hopes of avoiding another explosion. It's announced that it'll take at least 10 years to decommission all of the reactors at Fukushima. Until this is done, there is still a chance that something could go wrong and lead to a full-blown meltdown. April 2011. On April 11th, exactly 1 month after the 9.0 earthquake that generated the tsunami, which damaged the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, another earthquake shakes the region. This one is slightly smaller at 7.0 on the Richter scale. However, it's still enough to cause Fukushima to once again lose power and cause water to stop flowing into reactors 1, 2, and 3 for at least 50 minutes. Luckily, the generators are repaired and turned back on, restoring the water flow before significant harm is done. As a result of all the new data collected from the surrounding area, the Fukushima disaster is raised to a level 7 on the International Atomic Energy Agency's severity scale. This is the highest possible rating. The only other nuclear disaster to reach this level was Chernobyl, although it's important to note that the amount of radioactive particles released at Fukushima is only about 10% of the amount spewed from the nuclear reactor number 4 at Chernobyl. For the remainder of April, workers continue to pump cool water into the spent fuel pools to keep temperatures stable. They also construct a steel-plated fence around the facility to prevent radioactive leakage from reaching the ocean. Remote-controlled robots are brought into the power plant to gather data on the radiation levels inside the reactors. It's found that high levels of radiation are still escaping the damaged fuel rods. TEPCO announces that all reactors will achieve a cold shutdown by January 2012, 10 months after the nuclear disaster. In order to protect the public's health, the Japanese government bans the shipment of fish caught along the waters of Fukushima after they find 14,400 becquerels per kilogram of radioactive cesium. This is almost 30 times higher than the legal limit, which is 500 becquerels per kilogram. The Japanese government orders the Tokyo Electric Power Company to pay $12,052 per household to 50,000 households in the Fukushima region as reparations for forcing them out of their homes and contaminating the landscape with radioactive particles. This amounts to $602.6 million, money that TEPCO does not have. May 2011. The cooling system in Reactor 1 still needs to be repaired, but the radiation levels in the chamber are still too high for humans to withstand, even with protective gear. Vents are installed in Unit 1 to allow workers to conduct repairs. New guidelines are released by the government, stating that the acceptable level of annual radiation exposure in Fukushima Prefecture's elementary schools has been increased to 20 millisieverts. The International Commission on Radiological Protection limits radiation exposure to around 2 millisieverts per year for the general public, meaning that the radiation levels acceptable at elementary schools in Fukushima are 10 times the recommended level. This results in outrage from the Japanese and international community. The government is putting the lives of school children at risk, and people will not stand idly by while it happens. On May 11th, anyone who was evacuated from the 12.4-mile or 20-kilometer no-entry zone around the Fukushima Daiichi power plant is allowed back to their homes for 2 hours to gather personal belongings and important documents. They're not allowed to grab anything that may contain high amounts of radiation, such as food and liquids. It's a heartbreaking sight, as many of these people will never be able to return to their former homes. As May progresses, it's discovered that Reactor 1 has undergone at least a partial meltdown. The water levels in the reactor are dangerously low due to a leak near the core. Around 50 metric tons of contaminated water has escaped from the storage facility at the power plant, resulting in the surrounding area becoming even more irradiated. June 18, 2011. Safe temperatures at all spent fuel pools have finally been achieved. Temperatures in reactors 1, 2, and 3 continue to decline. 300 brave men and women from Japan's Skilled Veteran Corps offer to sacrifice their lives to help contain and clean up the radiation released by the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. They're all elderly citizens that feel it's their duty to do whatever they can to help their country. At the end of the month, a report is released that states radioactive substances have been found in the urine of at least 10 children from the Fukushima prefecture. July 2011. Two-thirds of all Japanese people want to end the use of nuclear power within their country. The Fukushima plant disaster has tainted the use of nuclear energy as a power source. Even though future disasters can be avoided by implementing stricter regulations and multiple fail-safes, the nuclear power industry has lost the trust of the Japanese public. The government implements a program to conduct lifelong checks on the thyroids of all Fukushima residents who were under the age of 18 at the time of the nuclear crisis. This includes conducting ultrasounds on 360,000 children in the next few years. At the end of July, the city of Soma in the Fukushima prefecture begins constructing a solar power plant to supplement the energy lost from the nuclear power plant and pave the way for alternative sources of energy in the future. August 17, 2011. The Independent releases a bomb that will decimate the already tarnished reputation of the Tokyo Electric Power Company. It's found that TEPCO conducted a cover-up about cracks in the circulation pipes at Fukushima Daiichi in 2002, 9 years before the tsunami. These findings mean that the systems in place at the power plant were already compromised, and if they had been fixed properly, it could have prevented some of the radioactive material from leaking out of the facility in 2011. This gross negligence on TEPCO's part is one of the reasons that the area surrounding the power plant is so heavily contaminated. TEPCO releases its own statement to try to draw attention away from its horrendous cover-up and informs the public the amount of radioactive substances releasing from the power plant is now 200 million becquerels per hour, or around 1/10,000,000th of the radioactivity that was being released in early March. However, the damage has already been done, and although it's good that the contamination levels are going down, they never needed to be so high in the first place. To add insult to injury, TEPCO also announces that the cleanup and stabilization of the reactors at the power plant are taking longer than expected and will take an additional several months to complete. October 2011. The installation of a new roof on the Unit 1 reactor building is completed. The amount of radiation being emitted from the power plant has been reduced to 100 million becquerels of radiation per hour, which brings the levels down to 1/8,000,000th of what it was right after the tsunami. A report is published that states around 70% of the people evacuated from Fukushima still have not been able to obtain new jobs. November 2011. Japanese officials informed the country and the world it will take over 30 years to decommission the damaged reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. This means that no one will be able to return to their homes in the evacuation zone for at least that long. However, in order to prove that cleanup efforts are working, a Japanese parliamentary secretary scoops up a glass of water from a puddle near the Fukushima power plant and drinks it. A collective cringe from people across the country arises, as radioactive particles likely aren't the only harmful things in the puddle water. Rice shipments from the Fukushima prefecture are banned, as samples contain up to 630 becquerels per kilogram, which is around 5 times more than the government safety limit of 130 becquerels per kilogram. This is followed by the first decontamination efforts by the government within the no-entry zone around the power plant. December 7, 2011. A new leak arises. 150 liters of radioactive waste spills into the Pacific Ocean before it can be contained. It's estimated that this incident results in 26 billion becquerels of radioactive material entering the sea. On December 16th, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda announces to the Japanese people and the world that all reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant are in cold shutdown. They're kept at around 158 degrees Fahrenheit or 70 degrees Celsius. Radiation levels are now below 1 millisievert per year around the power plant. The immediate danger of a complete meltdown has been avoided. However, experts warn that cleaning up all the radioactive material in the surrounding area will be a long and dangerous process. On December 29, 2011, the last emergency evacuation shelter in Fukushima closes. 448,000 evacuees move to temporary housing, hotels, and apartments across the country. February 2012. The mayor of Kawauchi, a village just outside of the evacuation zone, says that all local authorities will be returning to the town in April. Schools, clinics, and public services will resume in Kawauchi at that time. Former residents are encouraged also to return in order to work toward the future. This will be the first township to declare its intentions to return since the disaster almost a year prior. A few days later, a report is released stating that earthworms at Kawauchi have been found to contain cesium levels as high as 20,000 becquerels per kilogram. This worries scientists and medical professionals, as there's a concern that radioactive materials will bioaccumulate up the food chain. This means that as animals, including humans, eat plants and other animals in the ecosystem, more and more radiation will accumulate in their bodies. Eventually, the radiation levels could become so high that it could pose a health risk. The Japanese government bails out TEPCO for $8.5 billion so that it can cover its compensation payments. A study finds that around 42.2% of Fukushima prefecture residents have been exposed to over 1 millisievert of radiation, meaning that the power plant disaster has increased their exposure to above normal levels. However, the same study finds that 94.6% of residents were exposed to less than 5 millisieverts, which bodes well for their future health. March 2012. It's been 1 year after the Fukushima Daiichi power plant disaster that resulted from the negligence of the Tokyo Electric Power Corporation and the tsunami that decimated the Japanese coast. As of this moment in time, there have been 0 deaths as a direct result of the radiation from the power plant. 78,000 people are not allowed to return to their homes that are located within 20 kilometers of the power plant. There are only 2 operational reactors currently producing energy in Japan out of the 54 that were built since the 1960s. As a result of what happened at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, nuclear safety requirements are becoming more strict. No one wants another nuclear disaster, and by implementing clear protocols, stringent quality checks, and multiple fail-safes, nuclear power has become safer than it's ever been. It's estimated it will take at least 30 years to decommission the Fukushima plant and decontaminate the surrounding areas. Now watch Chernobyl Nuclear Explosion Disaster Explained hour by hour, or check out What If North Korea Launched a Nuclear Bomb minute by minute.